Experience systems have been a part of games since the tabletop days, when people had only their imaginations to go into dungeons to fight dragons, spending countless hour-long sessions over months leveling up their character with pencil and paper, back when video games were limited to games like Pong and had no real use of complex mechanics. As the games market grew and technology evolved, players could now digitally explore caverns and slay monsters. There began a growing need for reward systems giving feedback, so those pencil and paper mechanics were translated to video games. But as games get more diverse and allow for more creative approaches to that same end, does experience still serve a purpose, or have we moved past it? Do we just keep them around out of archaic respect, a sense of familiarity for players, or as a way to keep the quick and easy sense of satisfaction? Until recently, I never really questioned them. The idea of gaining experience to level up characters, abilities, and equipment just seems so integral to playing action-heavy games. Why would we do away with them? So, just a disclaimer here. A lot of games still rely on a means of leveling up because they work cohesively within their mechanics and flow of gameplay. Turn-based JRPGs, for example, require it, so you can feel how your party grows stronger with each encounter won, and it's a lot easier to manage a handful of characters. I imagine if Pokemon did away with leveling up, the bonds you make with every little monster you catch would get severely lost in the process. So while I will be talking in broad strokes, there are obvious exceptions to keep in mind. Historically, experience worked well with the need to make players feel like their characters are progressing. XP bars and levels were a very tangible means of doing so. As time has gone on, a few games have strayed from the path of conventions, but on a whole, not much has been changed about the way developers go towards implementing the mechanics. A few tweaks like the now prevalent talent trees served as a means to condense the overall idea of leveling up, but still just serves the same basic purpose. We have reached a point where even online shooters are giving out experience for cosmetic items, and loosely translating that time played to a level display below your name. Just because someone might have a way higher level than you, does not mean their skill is better, and that's kind of reflected in how most other genres of games treat them. Just because you grind for hours to earn a certain perk, doesn't mean you've achieved true mastery, and vice versa. Obviously not all games rely on experience and level ups. Generally, 2D platformers have more trust in players learning about their basic ideals like character mobility and level design, rather than grinding up towards new items and abilities to progress. Like in Super Mario World, no single power-up is mandatory to complete a level. They just allow for ease of progression as well as opening the doors for secrets such as new paths and extra lives. But a skilled player can get from the first world to Bowser's castle without touching a single mushroom. This lends to the idea that games can give players a genuine sense of growth without gating them behind experience and levels. However, this is a much more complicated issue because 2D platformers are a lot less mechanically complex than almost any RPG. So when Super Metroid and Castlevania Symphony of the Night gave birth to the aptly named Metroidvania genre, they did add the intricacy that was missing from earlier platformers. While Super Metroid forgoes the traditional approach many RPGs used, and opted for a less tangible system in the form of power-ups and health pack upgrades to increase Samus's strength, Symphony of the Night had the more conventional approach, with experience that's gained to raise Alucard's level. This is not to say any one way is objectively better. Both games play to their strengths, and deliver incredible experiences. But with this complexity added to what was a formulaic genre, it left latecomers to the Metroidvania game scrambling for how to implement their own experience system, because the pioneers themselves had not set a standard. So this is a good case study. Super Metroid, no experience. Castlevania Symphony of the Night, experience. The same end goal, with different means. Personally, I believe gaming is now at a point where we can trust players to learn game systems themselves, and at their own pace without gating things off through arbitrary numbers and skill trees to allow them progression. Organically letting players explore worlds to unlock new abilities, or letting them learn new tricks through gameplay is much more conducive to fun experiences, and also lets players talk to one another about what is and isn't possible, giving everyone their own unique story about their time with a game. With a lot of these gated systems removed, repeat playthroughs can really show how far you've grown as a player, not grinding up certain points of experience to get that one move or weapon that blows everything else out of the water. The Soulsborne series is a fantastic example of using an optional leveling up mechanic through Souls and Blood Echoes. It's entirely possible to have a playthrough at level 1, and proves that you have gained mastery of combat and enemy encounters rather than found an optimal build path to cheese bosses. This style gives you a sense of empowerment when a boss or set of enemies that gave you a whole lot of trouble can easily be dealt with at a lower level, and with worse gear because you now understand the timing of attacks, when to dodge roll, and knowing when someone is open to being hit. Open world games have been a pretty big perpetrator of unnecessary experience systems over the past few years, giving out menial numbers for the seemingly smallest of tasks, appointing pointless numbers for any given quest, constricting player freedom, and forcing choices on what paths to take. One open world game that surprised me recently with its genuine sense of progression is Breath of the Wild. After the original NES title, Zelda games have pretty much been a linear journey that allowed some deviation from the path, but the sense of character growth came from how it told the story. As things moved along, Link got stronger. It worked naturally and without the need to say, here are some points to put into abilities. Then Breath of the Wild came out and threw almost every convention Zelda games are known for out the window, and it's incredible in a lot of ways for it, allowing fluid growth of skill and knowledge through just leaving players alone to experiment with the systems placed within Hyrule, as opposed to leading them along predetermined trails to where the game wants you to be. If you've been anywhere near social media post-launch of the game, you may have noticed it was abuzz with posts, with some insane tricks usually followed by comments of, "I can't believe you can do this." Giving this kind of freedom to players really allows for self-expression within the world. Eventide Island is where you see just how far you've really grown and learnt as a player on your adventure. After spending a certain amount of time with the game before discovering the Shrine Trial, you're stripped back to basics, which means no weapons, no armor, and no items outside of your Sheikah Slate and Paraglider, tasked to complete a series of challenges like taking out 2 enemy camps and killing a boss with nothing. This quest just proves how much can be learned and how far you can progress without needing to have level ups to tell you what you can and can't do. When creating a character in a lot of games, you're forced to choose a class to play, among other things. Again, this staple isn't bad. Becoming a badass ranger and focusing in on just that class and its traits can be satisfying. In the process of streamlining its flow of gameplay, Skyrim did allow for players to switch classes, saying, if you grind hard enough, you can do anything. But that ended up just feeling incredibly disconnected. Going back to Breath of the Wild, this idea of on-the-fly class switching is fully realized in a way that is so organic that I didn't really pick up on it until it was pointed out to me. Switching between items of clothing to give different stats, allowing different approaches like sneaking to be a rogue, practicing with bow and arrow to be a ranger, or just going full barbarian with any two-handed weapon you can grab. There's even wands around the world that give you the option to be some kind of sorcerer. Letting players find their way to what they want to be, rather than force it upon them or even showing that those options are there, is really what a good role-playing experience is about. You have to self-impose the restrictions of being a ranger if you want, or you can multi-class and do anything and everything without the need to grind a myriad of different abilities. Earlier I said there were a lot of exempt genres, but one I think could reassess its approach is the MMO. Since World of Warcraft came crashing onto the scene, many companies have been struggling to build their own copycat in order to cash in on those monthly subscriber bucks. When it came out in 2004, it was a fundamentally different game, and Blizzard has done a lot to streamline the process to a point where now they've cut out a lot of the grinding required and significantly lowered the barrier of entry for new players. It's possible now that World of Warcraft has started to lose the justification of gaining levels. Ever since the Mists of Pandaria expansion, you can just buy away to endgame content that used to take up months of grinding to get to. I'm not saying this is necessarily a bad thing. People don't have the time to just sit and grind for hours on end. In this transition though, doing quests and discovering areas was once a means to learn how to use new abilities in controlled situations against low-level creatures before taking on harder challenges with dungeons and raids to truly test what you've learned. But seeing as how anyone with some extra cash can just buy their way to a few levels off the top cap, it's not nearly enough time to learn every single ability, spell, and what stats are required before just jumping into things. This paid system makes sense because World of Warcraft has been going for so long and so many veteran players have done the grind to top level an uncountable amount of times that this is just an easy way to make new characters. The thing with WoW, however, is that even at top level, further grinding is required to get your gear score up, which is what determines the dungeons and raids you can do. Having two caps, level and gear score, before doing endgame content made sense when everything wasn't completely streamlined. But now Blizzard could just do away with levels entirely to make way for the gear grind, and maybe quests to earn optimal attacks and spells your class may need per dungeon or raid, which would lead to more player interaction to figure out what is needed of you. Maybe it's too late for WoW to change the way it works, but this could be a good jumping off point for other MMOs to try and stand out from the countless clones that exist. I know it's a ridiculous thing to ask for all experience systems to be suddenly removed from games. Used in an appropriate context, it serves as a means to level up and push players through games organically. On the other hand, they can be detrimental if implemented just for a quick sense of satisfaction. It comes off as cheap, preventing players from getting to higher end content for the sake of lazy ideas. When given the opportunity, developers should try and limit themselves to not working with such a cornerstone mechanic to see what can be achieved outside of established conventions.